Hello everyone and welcome. In this session we're going to be looking at what IATI data can tell us about trends in aid spending under COVID in countries in East Africa. So I'm Carolyn Cooley, I'm Director of Engagement and Partnerships at Development Initiatives, and for those of you who don't know us, DI is a global organisation and we focus on harnessing the power of data and evidence to end poverty, reduce inequality and increase resilience. So our headquarters is in Bristol in the UK, and we have staff in the US and also in East Africa. So DI is a member of the IATI Secretariat and serves as the technical lead, but the analysis that we're presenting today is work that our analyst team have done independently of that as part of a project we're running on real-time tracking spending on development. So I'm going to start by introducing our DI speakers. If you've got your cameras on, people give us a wave, but I am just going to say that I know some of my East Africa colleagues have been having some connectivity issues. So if anyone drops out, we'll try and cover for them, but I think some people aren't going to be able to put screens on because it affects the bandwidth. So our first speaker is going to be my colleague Martha Bicaley, who is our senior analyst in Addis Ababa, and she's going to present the regional picture. Then we're going to take a deeper dive in two countries. So Moses Awori is going to talk about his experience of using data in Uganda, and Eastern Awino, our analyst in Nairobi, will talk about the situation in Kenya. And what the two of them will be sharing with you today is a sneak preview of a couple of forthcoming papers we're going to be publishing on real-time trends in spending in Kenya and Uganda. We're aiming to keep our presentations as short as possible, so we maximise the time that's available for questions and discussions. So please do type any questions you have in the chat or use the raise hand function to ask a question when we get to the Q&A. Our East Africa team will answer any questions around the analysis, and we've also got Bill Anderson online here, our data information architect at DI. He can help with any questions you have around the methodology. So with that, I am hopefully going to be passing over to Martha to begin the presentation.
So in this presentation, we are going to share a few top high-level insights that are emerging from our analysis of aid flows to the Eastern African region. In the past couple of years, the quality and timeliness of data published to the IATI standard has improved dramatically. Without IATI data, we would have to wait for another year before we could do any analysis of official development assistance. Now, this table shows the top 10 publishers by value and their spend in Eastern Africa region over the past 3 years. Those shaded have already published some data for 2021, making it possible for near real-time data analysis. So this is to illustrate the progress being made for near real-time data. However, this data is not comprehensive. Some of the challenges, for example, are we don't have data from the IMF, Japan and Korea, despite the fact they have published data to IATI in the past. You'll also note that the data from Germany only comes from the Federal Foreign Office. The German Development Agency, that is BMZ, does publish, but there are problems with how their spend is represented. And we don't have any data from China. Knowing that China is one of the biggest lenders in Africa and with huge interest in the continent, this is a big issue in presenting a full picture of resource flows to the region. The data is, however, comprehensive enough for us to detect trends in the behavior of international agencies. In IATI, the same activity can be reported on by a number of organizations as the money flows through aid delivery chain. We try to avoid double counting by comparing bilateral donors, international financial institutions, that is IFIs, and multilaterals separately. Here, we have compared bilateral and IFI spend to 8 Eastern African countries over the past 3 years. The most noticeable trend here is that the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank have released large amounts of cash into their COVID response programs in almost all the countries. We also note that despite the promise made by donors to support countries in their response to the pandemic, bilateral spending has remained relatively stable. So, where is the money going? In this table, we have simplified the sectors' classifications and ranked each of these 11 sectors by their respective amount of donor spending in 2020. In terms of a response to the pandemic, it shows strong support for health systems, but far less for the economic impacts of the past year. Another thing we cannot fail to mention is, given the global commitments towards dealing with climate change, the fact that spending on the environment is extremely low across all countries is of great concern. Let us now zoom in on the data in the last slide. If we look at spending on the health, humanitarian, governance and security sectors, we find this representing half of all spending at the expense of the 8 other sectors, which are more development focused. This begs the question as to whether the aid industry is genuinely interested in supporting sustainable development. As I mentioned earlier, the big story for 2020 is the increase in IFI spend. In Eastern Africa, this huge increase is from the World Bank and the African Development Bank. Let us now compare grants to loans. The vast majority of this financing is in the form of loans, and whether concessional or not, they still need to be repaid. The left-hand slide shows the data available through IATI. The right-hand slide includes data from the IMF that we have accessed from its website. And the reason that we went and retrieved this data is the headlines in Kenyan newspapers and social media highlighting protests against this unprecedented borrowing, alerting us to this big hole in our data. And my colleague from Kenya will speak more on this later. So what is the big takeaway from this particular slide for analysts? This is a lesson to us all analysts in not becoming trapped in incomplete universes, whether that be IATI or the OECD. Next, my colleagues Moses and Istan will continue this narrative at the country level. Thank you, and over to you, Caroline.
Okay, thanks very much, Martha, and I'm glad your internet held up. I know you were having difficulties. Moses, yeah, well done. Moses, can you join us now and talk through the slides on Uganda?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. So looking at the picture from Uganda, we look at a significant growth in IFI loans in 2020. This is mostly driven by the World Bank. If you look at the chart, you know that in 2019, there was no commitments from the World Bank, but in 2020, it's a huge leap. At the same time as the World Bank increases its commitments, you are seeing a drop from the International Finance Corporation and also a drop from the African Development Bank. Now, of course, financing from the World Bank at concession rates is something good for Uganda, especially at a time of great and heightened need during COVID-19. But then we should also pay attention to the effects of this increased loans to Uganda. That's already has amassed a lot of debt and is most likely going to be facing a lot of difficulties meeting its obligations in other areas. Now let's look at these commitments by sector in 2020. We see that governance and security took the highest share of loan commitments. Now, if you compare this to the health sector, which comes in second last, it's a bit of a concern because in 2020, the major issue for Uganda was COVID-19, and we would expect more money to be going to health and not to governance and security. Now here we look at a picture of Uganda's budget for financial year 2020-2021. we see that interest payments, which has of course been the leading destination for most of Uganda's spending, it takes about 1/3 of the entire budget. And if you compare this to allocations to other sectors like agriculture, social development, even health and education, this is a lot of money being taken away from key sectors and being taken to debt management. This is another point of concern that if you look at the loans being taken at the moment, continued borrowing is likely going to become a problem in terms of the money available for allocation to other sectors.
Okay, that's my turn. So my name is Easton Owino. I'm an analyst with Development Initiatives Nairobi office. And I want to present some key findings from our Kenya foreign aid analysis work that we have been doing between 2018 and 2020. So yeah, as we have heard from our previous presenters, loans and not grants are driving financing in East Africa. Well, the case is not different for Kenya. Our analysis has shown that between 2018 and 2020, Kenya had slightly higher commitments than grants. And between this period, Kenya had accumulated 46.9% of its total aid commitments as loans and 46% as grants. So the bulk of the loans were mainly contributed by IFIs, who contributed at least 94% of the total loan commitments, while the rest were contributed by bilateral donors. IFIs increased their loan commitments by 94.7% between 2018 and 2019, and 54.1% between 2019 and 2020. The major drivers being World Bank and Africa Development Bank. So the graph that you're seeing on the slide shows the different IFI loan sources, that is Africa Development Bank, International Finance Corporation, and World Bank between 2018 and 2020. So in the graph, you can be able to see that World Bank made the greatest contributions to the IFI loans between 2019 and 2020, while in 2018 it was Africa Development Bank and a little bit of International Finance Corporation, and lastly it was World Bank. So the current trend in aid loans is expected to be sustained in the short run to cover the shortfall that we have seen on the grants, and also to cover the budget deficits which have been growing since 2018. So in the next slide, we look at where the IFI loans, where the IFI loan commitments have been going to. So we can be able to see that in 2020, IFIs mainly prioritized governance and security and agriculture and food security. The same scenario has been replicated in 2018, where we have seen governance and security and agriculture and food security as the top two destination of IFI's loan commitments. This is quite sobering, especially with the challenges that Kenya's had in the health sector in 2019 and 2020. So naturally, we expected that health would have been at least in the top 3 sectors to which IFI loan commitments were sent to. In the next slide, we look at the implications of the increasing loans on the fiscal space in 2020. So in 2020, we can see, just like my colleague Moses has mentioned in Uganda, interest payments on loans are taking a huge percentage of the national budget. So in 2020, for example, we can see that interest payments alone took at least 20% of the total budget, of the total budgetary allocations. So we can see that the interest payments are shrinking the fiscal space and reducing sectoral allocations, especially in 2020, there was some decrease in allocation to the energy and infrastructure sector. There was some decrease in the national security. There was some decrease in public administration and international relations. So all these are partly because of the increasing interest payments that Kenya has made to the interest payments to its loans, which are likely to increase, especially as we move forward between 2020 and between 2021 and 2023. So that marks the end of my presentation. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And I can see we've got some questions coming in the chat already. So Matt, I know you've got a couple of questions, one around what looked to be a reduced contribution from WHO, which I suspect probably is a reporting issue, but I'm going to let Bill answer that. And I think you've also raised quite an interesting issue here around whether or not the coding on the World Bank loan to Uganda, if it's coded as governance, if it's general budget support, a lot of that may be going to health. So Matt, do you want to just say a little bit more about that, and then I'll pass you over to Bill and hopefully to Moses.
Thanks, Carolyn. Only to say that I'm not trying to poke holes, but it's something I have to deal with as well, and I'm trying to figure out whether we can have a plan between us. You know, if we had a shared list of annotations to do these things and started crowdsourcing, noting when something coded as governance isn't what we think of when we see governance. I'm sort of speculating because I'm seeing more and more people using IATI, and we're getting a lot of information, but it's hard to know whether that information reflects the truth on the ground. And so it's the sort of testing that out, and then what we can do about that, whether we can crowdsource some of that, making it easier for us all to do that.
No, I do think that that's a fair point. And I mean, certainly having been working on this analysis over the last kind of, 9 months or so, looking at global level and now at East Africa level, we are obviously coming across some of these problems as we go through it. And I agree, it's something we need to work through together. Bill, do you want to just deal with the first query that Matt had raised, which I think you might want to go back to the relevant slide where it looked like WHO was going down?
Yeah, I mean, with these numbers are, I mean, unless we've done our extraction from IATI incorrectly, these are the numbers as they are. So, I mean, I think for us, the key thing that what we're trying to establish at the moment is getting into the regular use of data in the near real time, so that we're looking, although this is looking back at 2020, that most of our work is, at the moment, we are now looking at what happened 2 months ago. And trying to look at that data, and that slowly learning how to improve which data we can use, which data we can't use. So I guess it's but at the same time we are concerned about the real-time implications of this, and I think there's a balance between saying this is what the data is saying to us, and we should be using the data, because only by using it will it be exposed, and then we can start improving it. But at the same time having to say, well, how truthful is it? Just while I'm here, Herman, on the issue of the IMF has published, but they are not publishing at the moment. There is no, I don't think there's any data for the last year or so from the IMF. So again, that's, I mean, we're starting to try and build an automated process of what we can and can't use. So, for example, from the UNDP, we have very accurate disbursement data, but the commitment data is cumulated to particular dates. So that is difficult to use. But Matt, I totally agree with you that we should start trying to find a mechanism of sharing the specifics of particular data, and trying and either engaging with the publishers or understanding it better.
Okay. I was just going to ask Moses on the specific issue that Matt has raised around the Uganda IFO World Bank loan. I don't know if you know any more details about it, or whether or not that's something we need to go back and have a look at. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I think we'd need some time to relook at the data, then we could come up with a more solid response.
Okay, that's fine. Rosemary, I see we've got a question on ADB and funding going down in 2020. I have to say, my understanding is actually funding across had actually gone up from ADB. Can we just go back through the slides and check that?
The only ADB one specific, here we go, it's gone up.
Yeah,
overall,
it's gone
across
up.
the region.
Yeah, that's what I'd understood, and we've been in touch with Sahir to check some data issues with her, so I think that is correct. It has gone up, hasn't it?
I think for Uganda, it went down. I think that's where the
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, on AFDB, there are issues in terms of the way in which all partners in multi-funded activities are reflected in the commitments, not in the disbursements. And we've been looking at spend here, not commitments.
Okay. Right, so we've got some other comments coming through. Melinda, you're saying you'd like to challenge Herman, so I'm going to let you go on and do that. So, Melinda, do you want to have your say?
Okay, well, what I wanted to lift there is that these reports have been really good for us as publishers to see that the problem is ours, is that if we're not getting the result that we think is representative of what we're doing, we have to look back at what it is we are publishing and why is it not showing our picture of what we're doing, and I just wanted to show my appreciation for these reports. I think that's very good use cases, and also has been really good in pointing out how trends in AIDS changes, and how timely data isn't only the important, but timely data of high quality is important. So that we're so stuck in these OCDAC reporting requirements that we have to have our data quality done almost half a year after the year is complete. But this shows that really it has to be, the quality has to be high right away.
May I comment on that?
Yes, I was going to invite you to, Herman.
Yeah.
Don't challenge me back.
No, I don't feel challenged at all, Melinda. It's what you mean with data quality, I think, which is the discussion here. I think coverage and timeliness is part of data quality. And what Bill just mentioned is that IMF is not up to date, so you really can't use their data. And of course, you're right. By using the data, you notice that it's not up to date and that it is really not usable for this use case. But then the question remains: what do we do with it? What's the feedback loop? Because if we do not have a feedback loop, we say, oh, well, we can't use the IMF data. We have to go to the website and do it manually and put a lot of time and effort in it. And again and again and again, with each use case, you will do the same thing. And I think that defeats the purpose of having a feedback loop and improving the data quality, because who in the IMF is feeling addressed by the fact that their IATI data is not up to date, and who is doing something about it?
Herman, could I come in? I mean, I think that is a problem for IATI. Where I'm sitting now, I'm not any part of IATI. I'm a data user.
No, I understand.
I'm not interested in the supply side anymore. I just want data. And so that's why we did go and get the IMF data from the website, because it is very relevant to Kenya at the moment. There are demonstrations on the streets.
Yes, of course.
That's not feedback loops.
But of course, but we should have prevented that this situation that you having to scrape the website was necessary at all. And I think I would make the case that we as IATI do not have enough control over the publishing process and the quality monitoring to identify that there is a problem with the data of a publisher and that it needs to improve on that, especially for a large player as the IMF, which makes a substantial amount of the relevant financial data for this use case. Yeah, you are dependent on doing this kind of research to notice it, but we should, as a community, be able to flag this far sooner.
I agree with the flagging. I hope we're not going to go back to the discussion some years ago, where it was suggested that if data wasn't of a sufficient quality, it should be blocked from being sort of published or recorded on the registry, because as a data user, I feel I want to make the choice of what is usable and what is not, because I've got a very different use case, I think, than from your grantee management.
Okay, I maybe not repeat that discussion right now, but I do think that it is important that when you publish in IATI, that what you do, that it is as complete and accurate as possible, because otherwise every time someone wants to use the IATI data for a specific use case, will run into the same problem time and time again, and will cost time and time again money and precious resourcing. And I think as a IATI community, we have a responsibility to make sure that the publishers involved know that their data are of substandard quality and that they should improve.
Shall I come in here? I don't want to open up old arguments between Phil and Herman, but I do think that one of the things that on the DI side is the more we use the data, actually almost inevitably, you know, we are spotting some of these issues. And I think the point about having a kind of feedback loop, but feeling that there is somewhere for that to go, because the point you've made, Herman, is, you know, is anyone, if the IMF and their publication isn't up to date, is anyone feeling the heat on that? So I don't know, I think maybe having worked on this for several months now, there's a question for DI also to think about, is that, you know, maybe we should just be producing some kind of report on some of the issues we have found, and actually have a roundtable with some of the publishers to address those, because, you know, we can't be doing this on the basis that every single time a user has a problem, you're having to go back to square one and raise that directly with the publisher. And I think the point you're making about coverage and timeliness being key aspects of quality, I would agree with. I mean, you know, timely, comprehensive and forward-looking was exactly what everyone committed to way back to Busan. So I mean, I think there are some challenges there. I think we have found there is a lot of really good data in IATI now, but with some publishers we're finding there's some nearly good data that with a few tweaks would actually be much more useful, and maybe that's what we should be trying to highlight with the publishers. So I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that. You've all gone quiet. Matt, was there anything else you wanted to come in on quality?
No, I'm on the wind up. I'm saying what we used to do when I work in governments and people don't give us data is put out a monthly report that says this donor's no longer important in this country. They've dropped out of our top 20, and kind of stimulates a bit of heat. The problem is, really, as a researcher and a data user, you can't do that because you're held accountable for your conclusions. And finding that balance where you want to say things, but you know where there's fluidity or where there's difficulties, it's something I'm struggling with, how to be able to say things now without ripping the floor out from under them with saying, but we don't know everything about this. And I think it's something about saying, this data shows here are these really interesting things, you know, using IATI like journalists would use other data sources, and then cross-referencing with something else. So, you know, by a couple of sources, then you have something much firmer. So you still use IATI, but as one data source amongst a bunch to verify a trend.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a reasonable suggestion, and I do think we need to be really careful about completely undermining what we have here, because I mean, as we said at the beginning of the presentation, the quality of the data we have now is much better than it was, you know, even 2-3 years ago. So things are improving. We do need to see further improvements.
The enemy of the good here.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm absolutely with Bill about starting using. We just need the right phrases so we don't put out things that turn out to be wrong later.
I think that's right.
If I could add that in my new role within DI, and it's kind of schizophrenic in a way, in that DI as part of the Secretariat and is working in partnership with the publishers to improve their data. But as data users, I got a feeling that we need some kind of trade union of data users who can actually be a little bit more outspoken and ruffle some feathers in a way that I don't think the Secretariat is in a position to do so.
You know, I think that's right. Now we've got lots of people commenting now, and I'm just going to say, let's bring you all into the discussion. I can see David Meganson. Do you want to speak to the point you made in the chat, David, and then Leo?
I was privileged to have a platform at the very start of VCE, so I'll yield the floor to others.
Okay.
It's basically what I said earlier.
Okay, right, Rosemary.
Yeah. Sorry, thanks very much. Yeah, just got sort of interrupted by myself. No, I just wanted to thank you so much for the study. I think it's really impressive work that you've done, and I take all the points about the sort of uncertainty around the data. And maybe it is a good idea to put, I don't want to call it a disclaimer. Disclaimer is really a strong word, but you know, just something, a sort of caution where we can still use the data, but you know, with that in mind. I had a question in terms of what do you do with the data as an organization? Because I see that one could make some really good insights if one went a little bit deeper in the conclusions. And I'm wondering if whether within the countries or with other actors, you actually take it forward, because there's a lot of potential to do a lot of things with this kind of user case. I think just last point is that, yeah, I mean, they're bringing China in, and IMF, I think that's something that it would really be good to take forward, because it is an important player, especially in this region. Thank you.
Yes. So I see, Matt, you've come in with a suggestion on that. Put out a news article that the IMF is no longer important in Africa to increase the heat. So might leave that one to you. On Rosemary's point about what more we're going to do, I mean, we are publishing more in-depth papers specifically on Kenya and Uganda. I don't know if Moses and Easton want to say a little bit more about what else we're going to do, because this is, I mean, those papers won't focus just on IATI data. That will also be looking at what's happening at national level. So I don't know if either of you want to say anything on that, or indeed Martha.
So the paper that you're working on, we are looking at stuff beyond IATI data. So looking at country domestic financing, as well as spending, then revenue, debt, and then seeing how this links to IATI, looking at foreign aid flows, disbursements, commitments. So I think within the next, this month, I think we should be able to publish these reports, and they should be available on our website. Maybe Martha can say something more, or Easton?
I was typing what I was going to say, but it's just to say the paper, as Moses said, looks beyond IATI. It's deep dives on domestic financing, which are the priority sectors, what are the gaps in financing vis-a-vis targets, and it has a special focus on public debt.
Okay, thank you, Martha. Mark, I think you've just made quite an interesting point, which is that, you know, if you fix the data issues once, hopefully the data can be used next time, but it's quite labour intensive if you're relying on individual users and then individual publishers. What you suggested is whether there's any kind of central support system. Given you're now co-chair of the data use working group, I do think it's an interesting question around whether that's something we could start working on together. As I say, I mean, I think we're actually uncovering quite a lot of interesting issues now that DI is working as a data user, and I'm sure others are as well. And certainly in the UK, we are seeing many more NGOs starting to use IATI data, not least to see if they can track what FCDO are doing in terms of cuts in the UK aid budget. So, Mark, do you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so in the next session on bridging data quality and data use, I'm going to talk very briefly also about some work that I've been doing with the Overseas Development Institute in Liberia and the African Development Bank to try and basically get their data into a better shape that we can then use it at country level. And the good news is that it worked. We managed to get the data, you know, get in the system, and we made a bunch of improvements to the data that then can be useful in not only Liberia, but then lots of other countries as well, every other country, obviously, where AFDB is working. But this took about a year of back and forth engagement, you know, lots of work with AFDB, kind of on the side of, I guess, both of our jobs, you know, to kind of get this working. In this case, we were both kind of motivated and keen to kind of get it working. So we kept following up and chasing each other and making sure things were going well. But yeah, this is something that we also need to do with a number of other donors to get the data working in Liberia as well. And we have kind of a hit list of, for more large donors to focus on. But yeah, I think that there is a need for providing some kind of, it's not even taking responsibility for fixing things. It's just chasing, following up, checking, is this still an issue? What can we do about it? This kind of thing. So yeah, whether that's like a convening role or whatever, I'm not quite sure, but I think there is a need for something like this.
No, I think that's an interesting idea. Any questions? I see we're getting a comment now on not all government data is correct. I'm sure that's true. Many data sources. Any more questions? Any more comments?
If not, if I could just add that our ongoing work, that although it's global at the moment, not at a country level, that on a monthly basis we are refreshing our tracker on real-time data. So looking at month-by-month developments, and sometimes we run into problems because someone publishes on a regular basis and then they stop publishing. But any engagement and comments on how we can improve that, most welcome. As I say, on the DI website on a monthly basis, we refresh that data.
I mean, I do think the main thing that for me, I think as this has thrown up is that the issues it has thrown up around data quality and where we come across those problems, what is the best way of flagging them, and what's the best way of going back to publishers who have perhaps published in the past and aren't now. I do think that's a valid point, and I do think on the DI side as well as IATI, it is something we need to look into. But as Bill has said, I think it does come down to, we can't wait for the data to be perfect, because it's actually only by using the data in the way that we are that we're actually flagging a lot of these problems. And we are still an awful lot further forward now than we would have been 3 or 4 years ago. So I think things are moving in the right direction. Any comments, any questions, or are people running out of steam? I think a lot of people have been online for 3 or 4 hours now.
I have one additional thought which popped up right in my mind. I think when the Aid Transparency Index would cover all organizations, and not only the 46 organizations it does now, it would earlier flag publishers which would have substandard data quality. And of course, they can do that all by hand. I think it should be automated for a large part. But then all publishers would be ranked, for instance, within their own constituency group, and then there would be an incentive to be more active into improving your data quality, including coverage and timeliness, which would mean that it would be far more usable for this kind of use cases, which has been demonstrated in this presentation. So I think there need to be enough incentives to get this improvement loop in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point on incentives is important, isn't it? Because I think, from a secretariat point of view, we can obviously pass on some of the data issues that we're finding to the IATI technical team. But if you're having a technical discussion with publishers, that's not always going to be enough of incentive to actually invest the time to correct that. So I think that's a good point, Herman. We've got a few hands raised up now. Matt, did you want to come back in?
5-second one to say, when I use OECD data, I have to ground truth it. OECD only allows, well, you used to 1 sector per project. That's it, IATI is better than that. I don't think we're being too harsh on IATI to say all of these data sources, OECD, IATI included, need an element of further work to make big points. And so I don't think we should think IATI is that much worse than other things on some of these.
No, I would second that. Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to come back on this point with the Aid Transparency Index, obviously someone who spent lots of time doing indexes and stuff for a long time. I think there's obviously there's a bunch of things that you can do through something like the Aid Transparency Index, and there's things that you can't so easily do. And I think the index obviously is a powerful tool for shaping incentives and shifting behavior. But I think there's, especially in terms of whether the data makes sense. This is something that it's much harder to automate the answer to this question. And I think things like this analysis from DI and any other sort of use of the data it's really important for trying to start to answer those sorts of questions. And things like, does the data happen to be cumulative within each year, which is a really big problem in terms of being able to use the data. You can maybe sometimes spot that a little bit through some automated checks, but it's much more visible when you see it, when you see the numbers, and somebody who's actually aware of what the number should look like can say, hey, that doesn't make any sense, and I think the work also with some of the donors at country level, doing something similar and kind of asking the country office to say, hey, these numbers that are being published through IATI, do they make sense to you? Do you recognize these sort of amounts? I think these are some things that people, if you don't have the context, it can be quite difficult to know, whether the answer is correct or not, whether the data is kind of correct or not. So yeah, I think this kind of work is really important. And then also to, whether you call it feedback loops or whatever, but to connect back through to publishers, to both in terms of specific data quality issues, and where you see that there are kind of some certain patterns of poor quality, of whatever poor behavior in terms of publication, approaches or whatever that are, seem to be somewhat systematically problematic. It would be good to be able to then go and address those. So the cumulative data type thing, can we do something to try and stamp out this, throughout the data? Are there things like this that we can do?